Hello and welcome in, everybody. I know we're still in the process of getting settled. I see more people are coming in as I'm talking. But we're just about ready to get started for today's program. I want to thank everybody for coming out to today. The Queens Historical Society is dedicated to preserving the history and culture of Queens, and today has been a kind of research project of mine that I kind of stumbled into that turned out to be much more interesting than I had ever expected. So we're going to be going over the history of airports here in Queens and the interesting facts that I had learned that most people probably wouldn't know about today's airports. So let me just get the presentation set up real quick and we can get started. All right. Also, if anybody has any questions during the program, please type them into chat. You should be able to either scroll down or it should be in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can just type out a question at any time, and I will do my best to answer it when I get a chance to. Or at the end, I would love to read some stories of everyone's experiences flying in Queens, traveling through. So if you have stories that you'd love to share, please put them into chat as well. All right. So, airfare, the history of Queens in the jet age. So, in 1903, the Wright brothers made the debated claim as having the first powered, manned, and controlled flight in a heavier-than-air craft, meaning that it wasn't a hot air balloon. Then, rather quickly, in 1909, College Park, Maryland, the Wright brothers actually created the first demonstration airport. This airport still operates today. It is also a museum of the history of flight, and it is the oldest continuously operated airport. So airports have been around for quite a while, and especially because airplanes rapidly developed during World War I. In 1926, we also had the technology further with things like the first liquid-fueled rocket by Goddard. So humans have been kind of innovating in the space of air travel for quite a long time, but yet it's still very recent and very rapid. So all of this happened and was thrust forward very quickly by war. With World War I and World War II, it was a huge push for all of this technology. So, how many airports were there in Queens? I think this is probably the strangest answer. You might have seen that I've said 4 airports, 5 airports. Didn't you say 6 at one point? Somebody would probably say, you told me there were 7. Yes. There's a lot of airports that have been in Queens, and as I research, I keep finding more and more as they pop out of the woodwork. But it's also a matter of some wiggle room, where there's private airports versus public airports, so the definition can get a bit fuzzy. But obviously, with the 2 major airports that we have today, which is by itself a little unusual for there to be 2 nationally known airports in such a tight radius. Does make Queens unique, but we have LaGuardia Airport and JFK International Airport. However, those are by no means the only airports that Queens has had. The first airport we had was the Naval Air Station in Rockaway. I'll talk more about each of these individually. We also had the Flushing Airport, which is still kind of around today. You can see it on maps, but it is definitely closed. We had Holmes Airport in Jackson Heights. We had North Beach Airport, and we'll see what that becomes soon. A lot of people like to say, when I talk about this program, oh, Floyd Bennett Field. No. Floyd Bennett Field is in Brooklyn, actually. But it is very close to Queens. So it makes sense for a lot of people to think, oh, that's another airport in Queens. It was a very popular airport. It is now a park. But not technically in the scope of this project. Then we had Rockaway Airport, which was more of a flight school, and then a very tiny airport that was only briefly around the Jamaica Sea Airport. So that's a lot of airports. So we'll start at the beginning. Queens has been on these flight maps since World War I, when the Navy installed one of the first air bases in the nation in Rockaway Peninsula. This site was also the location for the first transatlantic passenger flight, carrying 51 people across the Atlantic to Plymouth in England in 1921. Passenger flights by this time had been established since 1914, mostly with flights between local cities, relatively short hops by today's standards. But these kinds of achievements were on the backs of previous accomplishments by such as Alcock and Brown's first transatlantic flight in 1919. And then also nearby was Charles Lindbergh's famous flight with a solo flight across the Atlantic. But that was done in 1927 from Roosevelt Field, which is actually in Long Island, further in, so not technically Queens. But you can see how Queens is surrounded by all of this air travel. So this naval air station was demolished in 1930 and is now the site of Jacob Riis Park, which you can visit today. It's mostly a parking lot, but if I click, you should be able to see now we have Jacob Riis Park here. So you can't really tell that it used to be an airport. The roads and the parking lot don't really line up with the previous runways. Not very well. But for a few years, this was not the only airport in Queens. So in 1927, the Flushing Airport was opened in College Point, not too far from Flushing. And it was one of the few airports that served New York City. Newark Airport in New Jersey would actually open a year later in 1928. So for that first year, Flushing Airport would have been the primary place for people to fly into. It was actually the busiest airport that serviced the area, and prior to its construction, the low demand had been sustained by private airstrips. But with Flushing Airport, now there was a more publicly available airstrip to land on, and it kind of bloomed from there. Floyd Bennett Field would have also been constructed around this time in Brooklyn to handle the growing commercial aviation demand after World War I. But again, we're not going to focus on that today. So during this time, all of these airports are starting to compete with each other. Flushing Airport would not be the only one, and eventually in 1939, LaGuardia would be created and would end up being the major hub for air transportation, and it would eventually outshine smaller fields such as Flushing Airport. It was named after Anthony Speed Hanslick. Speed was his nickname, but usually people would just call it Flushing Airport. Flushing Airport remained open until 1984, and it mostly served small flights like personal aircraft, or actually had a blimp hangar. You can see in this picture the Goodyear blimp would regularly park there. Um, the runways themselves are still kind of visible on the maps, and I'll show a picture here. On the right, you can see what you can find on Google Maps today. You can see kind of the outline of the airstrip, but it is overgrown, flooded, and kind of swampy. The field would regularly flood even when it was in operation because of where it was built. But you can see on the right all the little planes parked along the way, and you can see these two hangars up in the top left corner. Those two hangars actually would stick around. They were eventually demolished in 2008. So no longer there, but you can still see kind of the signs of the airport if you ever drive along Linden Boulevard, Linden Place. You can see kind of the swampy area from there. Another tiny airport, so tiny and so brief. I don't really have any good pictures from it, but we do find it on flight maps. It was opened in 1927, the Jamaica Sea Airport. It was just a small airport by the water. Sea airports were primarily for seaplanes. They could land on the water and then be towed back up onto the land. It was a matter of convenience. The opened in 27, but closed in 36, so not open for too long. Especially because the property would be purchased to become Idlewild, or New York International Airport. So, Holmes Airport is one of those airports that I think a lot of people would not have realized even it had existed, because right now the area where it is mostly homes. People have developed the space already, and you can barely tell that something was there. But it was a small airport in Jackson Heights. This was before all the development had taken place, so there was at least open space large enough for that airport. Opened in 1929, it was actually one of the closest airfields to Manhattan, which was one of the ways that they tried to advertise themselves. But because it was very tiny, it didn't get a whole lot of use, similar to the Flushing Airport, smaller aircraft, and also it was a blimp port. Here you can see the Goodyear also had a hangar here for the Goodyear blimp. Interestingly enough, this is where the first aerial traffic report is from a Goodyear blimp that was launched from Holmes Airport. Because of its location along the Grand Central Avenue, sometimes the airport would be called Grand Central Air Terminal, and you'll see it on the maps as that as well sometimes. When LaGuardia Airport was announced as a project in, I believe, 1937, they tried to sue the city to try and stop the project from happening, because that competition from such a large airport so close would definitely hinder their business. And indeed, in 1940, only a year after LaGuardia opened, Holmes Airport would close. Here's an aerial shot of Holmes Airport. You can see the wide open space in the middle of the neighborhood that would become Jackson Heights. Here we can see an advertisement from Holmes Airport describing its airport supremacy, describing how close it is to Manhattan compared to other options like the Flushing Airport or even Floyd Bennett Field. And then on this map here, you can see that Holmes Airport is right next to St. Michael's Cemetery. St. Michael's Cemetery is obviously still around, so if you want help finding where it was on the map, that is a great landmark to help you find it. But you can see the Grand Central Parkway. of where it gets its nickname. And then you can see this big other airport up top, North Beach Airport. We'll talk about them next. That would become LaGuardia. So here we've got the an aerial shot. I believe this is from 1921. This aerial shot shows that there's lots of this undeveloped land, and then this is an aerial shot from today. You can see all of those buildings have completely filled in that space. The airport really doesn't show any signs of having ever been there. Here we go. Here's one of the pictures of it being described as Grand Central Air Terminal. And you'll also see the Glenn Curtis North Beach Airport. That is what it looked like before it got expanded. So let's talk about that one. Glenn Curtis is a early aviation pioneer, and he was honored in the name of this airport. That was also called North Beach Airport because of its location. But it was built on the site of a former Steinway amusement park. They purchased the land and then developed it into an airport. And similar to the Flushing Airport, it was also kind of swampy. They did expand the peninsula that had been there, and we'll see a picture of that in just a bit. But as North Beach kind of continued to operate, it was selected as a candidate location for Mayor LaGuardia's Municipal Airport project. After Mayor LaGuardia had his famous flight where he bought a ticket that said New York City on it, and they landed in Newark, New Jersey, he was upset and was like, no, my ticket says New York City on it. Take me to New York City. And so instead they flew him to Floyd Bennett Field. Floyd Bennett Field is technically farther away from central Manhattan than Newark Airport is. So he kind of made things harder for himself just to make a point. But because of that, he also was able to push through the project to make New York Municipal Airport. So what had happened is once they selected this location, they purchased the North Beach Airport, kind of demolished it. You can see in this picture it has that 3-spoked or 6-spoked, depending on how you look at it, runway with a central circle. That is a very distinct runway for this airport. They kind of demolished it and then expanded it even bigger to make LaGuardia Airport. So you can see in 1930, you have your Glenn Curtis North Beach Airport, medium size. Then in 1937, which is when the airport was purchased by the city, it shrinks as they're demolishing it to eventually develop it, which you can see here in 1939, where it has many more runways and a much larger footprint in Flushing and Bowery Bay. So the expansion was actually done in collaboration with the Work Progress Administration. And because of that, it kind of helped build up the airport, and there's a few consequences of the way that they built it. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. So here's a picture of the peninsula at Bowery Bay before any airports were made. This is the same aerial photograph from, I believe, 1921. So this is when it would have had the amusement park in it. And then you can see how drastically the landscape had been changed to accommodate the LaGuardia Airport. And you can even see that it's been expanded on compared to the North Beach Airport footprint, because they keep expanding and adapting LaGuardia Airport on a regular basis, really. So LaGuardia Airport, or more officially New York Municipal Airport when it opened, was hugely popular. When it finally opened in 1939, it was celebrated and scorned, but still very popular. One of the things that they would actually do is you could pay a dime to basically watch airplanes take off and land at the airport on the runway. And it was a commercial success almost immediately. It had contracts from many of the largest airline companies in the world, and so it was very competitive. It was basically the place to fly in New York already. Newark Airport actually even had to renovate their airport to keep up, but yet they still fell behind, especially because during World War II, Newark Airport shut down, so it would become a military base, essentially. The military would continue to use the site in Newark until 1946, but New York Municipal Airport did not have to do that, so they were able to continue to operate. Interestingly, the timing of the creation of this airport would have been just before the first World's Fair in Flushing Meadows Corona Park, located here at Queens. However, it was unlikely that would have been the major way that people are going to get here, because at this time, flying is very expensive. Flights are small, they're slow, and they don't go very far. People would have more likely to have taken the train to get to the fair, or more likely even taking the bus, as evidenced by a lot of the advertisements that I found that are for various different bus companies saying, come see the fair, ride a Greyhound. But despite this, the fair and LaGuardia Airport kind of shows a desire to move technology forward. LaGuardia became so popular that only 2 years later, in 1941, they started working on opening up a second municipal airport in Jamaica Bay. Something that I mentioned earlier was because of the way that the Works Progress Administration constructed the runways, it's a very difficult airport to land in, from what I've heard, and that the metal reinforcements in the earth that had been moved can cause magnetic interference, and so as flights take off, they have to double check their instruments to make sure that they haven't been affected by the interference. But LaGuardia did offer transatlantic flights up until 1951. But with Idlewild's popularity and the 2,000-mile rule, they eventually lost all of their transatlantic flights, and it became more of a domestic airport. The 2,000-mile rule is a special rule that applies to LaGuardia, and it was later changed to a 1,500-mile rule in the 1980s. Basically prevents any flight coming to LaGuardia if they're from a location more than 2,000 miles away. I'm not exactly sure the exact reasoning behind that. I believe it's because of the size of the airport, but so we have another tiny airport to talk about before we get to the big one. We have in 1940, so a year after LaGuardia opened, we have Rockaway Airport. Rockaway Airport is on a tiny peninsula, on the peninsula of Rockaway, and it was founded in 1940 as a pilot school, mostly. When it was founded, though, it was also set up by the owner to be prepared for any potential war, and during World War II, it was turned into an auxiliary base, and it became confusingly also called the Rockaway Naval Air Base. So there's two different Rockaway Air Bases. But this one is further east than the other one. Eventually, in 1946, it returned to civilian use, and many veterans of World War II became flight instructors. And it was a very popular air school, but it was closed in 1957. Here we can see a couple of maps that and an advertisement for it. You can see it's advertised with a woman pilot. That was one of the flight instructors for Rockaway Airport. And you can see that it says on the hangars, Rockaway Airport Government Approved School. They really pushed the fact that they were a place to learn how to fly. You can see up in the top with the yellow map, that plus symbol in the middle is where the Rockaway Air Base was. Especially, this is a Navy air map, but that's the approximate location of the actual airport, in case you were wondering where in the Rockaways it was. The school closed due to the fact, and it was kind of hearsay from the people nearby, that the middle school that was opened up across the street from the airport was a safety concern, which was also potentially the reason why Flushing Airport closed, because they had a crash also near when it closed in the 1970s. And the concerns of putting an airport near houses was enough to get people wary of the idea. So now we have Idlewild Airport, or JFK International. You'll notice that a lot of these airports have nicknames. So Jamaica Bay was chosen for its ideal location near the water, which meant that planes could approach from the water side and could potentially reduce noise, and also prevent the issues that I just mentioned of takeoff and landing accidents being potentially an issue to the residents of the neighborhood. But because of the scale of this airport, the community of Idlewild Park had to be relocated. But the location was not unfamiliar with airplanes because of the previously mentioned Jamaica Sea Airport, which had been located in the area since 29. Construction of this required a lot of terraforming and landfill, and became unexpectedly expensive. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but first I want to talk about the jet age. So with the jet age, it's pushed itself at the forefront in the late 50s, early 60s, with the invention of the jet plane. And so now it is... Oh, my notes are a little bit out of order. Anyway, so now with jet travel, people, the prices are going down. More people are starting to be able to use flights for leisure. In 1955, a flight to London was $290, which would be about $2,800 in 2020 dollars. So still very expensive, but much cheaper than it had been before. But with the Boeing 707, one of the first jet planes, now we have futuristic designs and amenities, faster speeds, larger aircrafts. So now airlines are competing on levels of comfort. 1958 also marked the first year that air travel was more popular than naval travel for transatlantic journeys. Until then, it was far more practical to travel by boat because of its affordability and the comparative comforts that were possible, such as luxury rooms. However, boats remained until the 1970s as a common option for transatlantic travel. But the Queen Elizabeth II remained as the final ocean liner ship, as opposed to a cruise ship for passenger travel, until she was replaced in 2004 with the Queen Mary II, which remains the only passenger ship in the Atlantic. Ooh, all right. So, I need to figure out what happened to my notes. Things are a bit... Okay. Now I need to see where I am. Let me move my picture. I'm covering up the slide. All right. So, I want to take some time to watch this quick little video made by Pan Am, going over Worldport, which is one of the terminals at JFK International Airport. This is going to give you kind of the insight into how it was like to go in and experience the fun of air travel. So there's a lot of these great films on Periscope Film. They have a YouTube channel. So here we have a passenger just checking into an airport, and he's struggling with his luggage. He's having a horrible time. People are looking at him like he's crazy because he's in such a rush. And now he has to wait in line. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to kind of skip through a little bit of that, of him waiting in line. Rushes to his flight after checking in. It's raining. He's having a miserable time. And he just barely makes it onto his airplane. However, let's compare that
to his easy destination.
To Pan Am's Worldport.
Terminal, journey's end, or the immense beginning of 1,000 private adventures.
Here we have a family coming in, greeted by a doorman, helped out of their car, gentle music, even the children in tow, a parking service. And the family comes in to this awe-inspiring work of architecture, the Worldport, where things are calm and collected and efficient. So as we enter the jet age, we have these airports that are competing on this comfort level. And so part of that comfort is being family friendly, having amenities, and just being simple to use. Elements of design had been reapproached for recreating how the airport functions, so that way customers have a easier time at the airport and a more efficient way of processing people, where they're in and out without much hassle. They get their tickets, check in their luggage. Also, we have some new technology, some conveyor belts that captures the imagination. The jet age is all about the new. And it captures the imagination of this child a little too much. What a scam. Now they're coming to purchase their tickets for their flight. We have nice orderly systems. They're taking a Boeing 707, a jet plane. And now they're ready to get onto their flight and wait for it. But where do they go? New signage was a big deal because now they had designed a system where it was easy to tell, okay, our flight's right there. We have this time at this location. A much simpler process. They head to a comfortable waiting room with these large windows. The baby in tow. And now they can watch the airplanes. So, another interesting aspect is that after the kids have a meal, the mother actually heads over to a in-airport nursery. For the waiting period, you could drop your kids off, and they'd be looked after, which is an amenity that I think most people would think strange today. But they're all about this level of comfort. Of course, this comfort is not free or cheap. So we can assume a certain level of expense for this family that isn't being mentioned. Here we have the kid exploring the architecture of the building, being enraptured by the wonderful new designs that are being explored in these new jet age buildings. So we also have here a small little model inside where the grandfather comes by to find the kid looking at the model planes, and he's feeling nostalgic for how flying used to be. And now they're kind of reminiscing and also looking to the future. So after a comedic moment where the mother almost forgets the child in the nursery, she goes to grab the kid, comes back to catch their flight. And so here we have a moment where the grandfather and the father send off the passenger. This is an element of airports that we don't necessarily have today, where you can kind of be with people after in the gates. But we have here at Worldport something unique. I'll go over it a little bit more later, but they walk down a gentle ramp and directly into the plane. The circular shape of the Worldport provided a roof over top, and then an elevated platform that people would wait on to allow them to just walk in. So the architecture of these buildings is also taking into account the comfort of the passengers, because before, once you're at the airport, when you're ready to go, you have to get on some portable stairs and walk up. Now they're taking these kinds of moments of design into consideration in the actual construction of the building. All right, so the rest of it is just them talking about how much their airport is so nice. So let's move me. Whoops. So I don't think it would be fair to talk about Idlewild Airport and its beginnings without talking about the Beatles arriving. A little slice of American history intersecting with airports. This was in February of 1964, only 77 days after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The Beatles arrive at Idlewild Airport to start off the British invasion Here they're at the International Arrivals Building, which I'll go over a little bit more. But if you look at the top of the building in the background, you can see that all of those are people. So the top of the International Arrivals Building was an observation deck, and it was packed that day with screaming fans all clamoring to see the Beatles as they arrive. Idlewild International Airport would also home the press conference that the Beatles would have, where they had a humorous kind of series of quips with the interviewers, trying to also speak over the clamoring fans who interrupted them constantly with their shrieking and screaming. The Beatles would go on to play at Shea Stadium to kick off their U.S. tour. So, here's my slides. The jet age. With the introduction of the jet plane, the world started rapidly shrinking. In a figurative sense. Now people could go places all over the world for leisure. Here we have a TWA kind of pricing list to give you a general idea. These prices seem really low to today's standards, but in $2020, it's still very expensive. And also, let's see, there's not even a flight across the country to New York. The closest one you have is really Pittsburgh or Boston. So at least listed on here. And they'd be hundreds of dollars. So with the introduction of this jet age, people started wanting to embrace or to do away with many of the traditions of architecture and trying to embrace new modern ways of approaching the future. So here we have a jet age building. This is the interior of TWA Flight Center. Here's the Worldport. Okay, there we go. This is another famous Queens jet age building, the Jamaica Savings Bank. And Queens also embraced the jet age with the jets. In 1962, I believe they were introduced, and the team was rebranded into the Jets to kind of tie into the fact that Queens was a center of jet age progress. And this was only furthered with the 1964 World's Fair. You have even more jet age style architecture at the fair, and this fair was all about showing off the new stuff. We got the Ford building with those nice arches. We have more overall view. All these interesting, weird new buildings that kind of do away with the standard, it's a box. Here's a pavilion for the transportation. You can also see that they celebrate airports and air travel in the fair itself. But airlines were constantly advertising trips to the fair as a way of quickly and easily seeing the future. There was a lot of advertising to try and get people to come to Queens and the World's Fair, and by doing that, they're encouraging flights to New York. They want people to fly to get to New York from all over the country. And they provided services at the World's Fair that were very unique. Here's the Port Authority building that is currently the terrace on the park. But this building was actually a helicopter pad on the top. There was a helicopter busing service between the fairgrounds that was run by New York Airways called the Skyline Route. This helicopter was essentially a ferry that brought you to the to the park, but also would ferry people between the airports in New York, including Newark. These were the first scheduled airline services done by helicopter, and because they were scheduled airlines and not charter flights, they had the ability for passengers to just simply buy a ticket to get on, rather than having to go through the whole process required by law for chartered flights. And so I really wish I could go more in detail about the helicopter service in itself, because it's so fascinating. But I definitely would look into checking it out. I have a very interesting video that I'm going to post into chat. This video is a great one to watch on your own after this program. That'll go into how it works and all of the fun features that the Skyline route would take. So, Terminal City. Terminal City was this idea for, at this time, JFK International Airport, or sometimes New York International Airport. Yeah, no, this would have been started in the Idlewild days, but it'll change over to JFK. So at first, there was a design done by Delano and Aldrich, who were the architects of LaGuardia, and they were expected to have this all finished in 1944. However, due to delays compounded by the World War, this did not come to fruition. Also, the plan had originally called for a marine terminal, but as the 40s progressed, it was becoming increasingly apparent that flying boat-type planes were phasing out. Newer planes had different needs, especially jets, that called for longer runways, so the plan had to be changed. The new plan was for more radial design with a central terminal, and then this design was done by Harrison and Abramovitz. But by now, $60 million had been spent on construction, and the new design would have cost an additional $70 million. This was a bit too much, and the project eventually was taken over by the Port Authority. Under the Port Authority, the scale was pared down, and the plans started looking like these modern results. So the Port Authority was the one to design this kind of terminal city style with that. And so here's a quick little table of all of these early terminals that were opened up in this jet age. And I'm going to go over a couple of them because each of them is unique and interesting in their own way, but I want to highlight a couple of them. Specifically, I want to talk about the International Arrivals Building. The IAB was the first of the Terminal City terminals to be opened in late 1957. So this was just knocking at the door of the start of the jet age. So with the 707 entering service for the first time at Idlewild Airport, it quickly became successful, running its transatlantic and domestic flights. And so inside of the building, you have all of these flags everywhere, representing all of the different countries, because they were very serious about the fact that, we can go farther now, international flights. And you also have this wonderful piece of sculpture, the Alexander Calder sculpture, very famous for his mobiles, that would hang in the lobby of this airport. And so you have still examples of like public architecture where you want to make sure that the people enjoy their surroundings. I would also be remiss if I were to neglect another famous terminal, but this one is at LaGuardia. This is the Marine Air Terminal. This is the last remaining terminal from the 1930s. It was built up near the water, and it was intended to handle incoming seaplanes. But the building itself is a famous example of Art Deco style, and contains on the inside, on the lobby, the mural Flight. This mural depicts man's relationship with science leading up to aviation and was painted in 1942 as part of the Works Progress Administration. However, it was painted over in the 50s after suspicions that it was actually secret communist propaganda. But it was later restored after a historian petitioned to have it saved in the late 1970s. Today, it's a small terminal service operated by JetBlue. So, the next terminal building for Terminal City was the United Airlines terminal in 1959. Here we have another example of architecture being incorporated into the design for the passengers. You can tell that the building itself is slightly elevated. It was built at the same height as the airplanes, so that way there were no ramps to go up and down from. This also was designed for speed and efficiency, so people could get to where they need to go immediately and not have to go back and forth. One of the other innovations that the United Airlines terminal presented was shopping. The terminal contained shops and restaurants for guest services and supplies. This captive audience of customers had all sorts of options to pick from to and from their destinations going forward, because as we know now today with the duty-free shops, there's pretty much a mall in almost every airplane terminal at this point. And United Airlines was the first to do so. Here we can see examples of the signage, making sure that things are simple, easy to read, people know where they're going. It's all about making it easy. You can see on here also that it talks about its restaurants. It wants people to know, go spend your money over there. So, two more terminals opened in quick succession in late 1959 and 1960. We have Eastern Airlines, which is depicted here, and then American Airlines over here. So I also want to show some... actually, I want to point out in the distance here in the Eastern Airlines, you can see a round-shaped building currently under construction. That would be the Worldport building that would soon open. So here's an interior shot of American Airlines, and you can see these business-type executives lounging in luxury with drink in hand and sofas with padded seats and magazines and nice chairs. However, this comfort is still mostly reserved for bigger fish, those with a large budget or a company to write off the expense for it. This is a picture of what would probably be your more typical arrangement at the American Airlines. This is American Airlines Gate 4, where you have just basic chairs and not so comfortable looking. Anyway, Worldport. Worldport is an iconic saucer-shaped building as the crowning jewel of Queen's Jet Age architecture, even winning a prize from the Queen's Chamber of Commerce. As visitors came in, they were greeted by a series of zodiac sculptures in the front by Milton Hebald. You can see that they're kind of attached to that fence-like structure above the Pan-American sign in front of the building. Again, we have large works of public art built into these architectural wonders. So the overhanging roof allowed a shield for the customers as they boarded the planes. So if it were raining, it wouldn't be an issue. You could still easily board your plane. But also, the whole airport is built elevated just like the United Airlines. And so that way there was no need for portable stairs. However, this crowning jewel of jet age architecture would not last forever, especially after Pan Am went bankrupt in 1991. Much of Worldport's operation was taken over by Delta, and at this point it would be called Terminal 3. However, Delta stopped using the terminal in 2013, and despite a campaign to preserve and landmark this building, it was demolished in 1914. Despite efforts to landmark it, the New York State Historic Preservation Office had revoked the building's eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places in 2001, claiming that the building had lost its significant historic integrity due to excessive modifications. Which makes sense that you need to update your airport over time. So, unfortunately, it was not able to be saved, and so it is gone now. Here we have an interior shot. You can see the rich interiors. We also saw this in the video as well. But then came TWA's Flight Center in 1962. And this quickly stole the architectural show with a design by Eero Saarinen. Notably, Eero was also designed all of the furniture in the building for a complete and cohesive look and feel. With barely any straight lines, swoopy curves of the building's interior and exterior captured people's attention. It quickly became one of the symbols of the jet age and Queens airports in general. Passengers could load up to this side of the building on the road, enter the side halls to get their tickets and check in their luggage, and then mill about in the waiting area. The structure had a conversation pit in the middle. You can see here in the bottom left a very packed conversation pit style waiting area where you had large windows that allowed people to look out the window and watch the planes take off and land. This was also known as Terminal 5. TWA, like Pan Am, was not forever for this world, and in 2001 it went bankrupt and was acquired by American Airlines. The building was used until 2002, but was landmarked in 2005. It sat unused for a long time, and while a more modern Terminal 5 was built around it for JetBlue. 2016, construction started to convert the building into a hotel, one that was specifically themed after its original condition and what it looked like in 1962. The hotel opened in 2019 and is geared mostly towards travelers. I actually stayed there last month, and it was wonderful. Then we have the National Airlines Sundrome. The Sundrome was one of the last entries of the jet age, very late in the decade. This was an all-glass-walled terminal by I.M. Pei. I.M. Pei is an internationally famous architect known for his striking and committed angles and facades, and he chose to make the Sundrome have an uninterrupted walls of glass, so that way you had complete views of the airport. I.M. Pei was also known for designing a great number of public buildings. I don't have time to list all of them, but he is a very well-accomplished architect, so it does make sense that he was chosen for a project that would see millions of passengers. Pei had actually implemented a newer design that allowed pickups and drop-offs to be on both sides of the building, as opposed to just one. So this allowed them to be a little bit more efficient with how passengers came in and out of the building. This was due to the elevated gates and the use of sky bridges. However, the building was designed for far more traffic than it ever saw. it was the terminal for the smallest airline at JFK and ended up changing ownership a few times. Eventually, it was left vacant in 2008 and then demolished in 2011. So, as we probably all associate, airports also involve a lot of security. And that is one of the biggest changes to how the culture of traveling has changed, is the increase really the steady increase of security over time at airports. So this still is from 1973 at a journalist came in and videoed people's reactions to new security measures at JFK Airport. And it was to some mixed reactions. But security at the airport had not always been this hour-long plus event that it is today. Security was a lot more simple in the early days of travel. To a certain degree, because of that, hijackings were far more plentiful. From 1961 to 1972, there were 159 hijackings. A lot of times it was due to Cuban revolutionaries redirecting flights, really. And it wasn't until 1968 that an X-ray machine was suggested for screening passengers. But people were very hesitant to add these security measures because they thought that it would scare potential passengers, making them think that flying is unsafe. People also complained about the invasion of privacy. This is very familiar to us today, and it was made only worse by a post 9/11 America, where the TSA is a whole agency dedicated to this process. This also dictates a notable fundamental change in the creation of insular spaces inside airports, where only checked-in passengers are allowed at the gates. Visitors must wait outside. So this creates a kind of a liminal space for where airports are no longer just kind of a place to go. They are a transition period between you being in the starting point and starting your journey, and then eventually arriving at your destination, and then you finally leave the airport and at your destination. They're no longer a social place to be. So I mentioned this is another film that I recommend that you take a look at. It's a great little overview of how the public reacted to the introduction of these machines. They interview people as they walk through them. Some of them are like, oh, this makes me feel safer. Some of them say it makes me feel less safe. And some of them are just like, I don't want to talk to people right now because I'm really worried about my flights or anxious about that kind of stuff. So you get a wide range of reactions to it. Also, I want to talk about the impact of airports on their community. Probably the biggest impact that airports have on their community, besides jobs, is noise. This is a 2018 map using data from the Department of Transportation. This is a map of noise levels around New York City. This does not include the subway noise. I filtered that out. Here you can see clear scars running across Queens, where noise levels far exceed even the cacophony of the honking of roads. And New York City roads are loud with honking. But they are nothing compared to these large streaks of noise caused by airplanes approaching the runway. And you can even see the angles at which they're coming in, because the streaks have clear directions to them. You can also see other airports in the area and how much noise they have over in Long Island and over in New Jersey. You can see just how loud it is over at Newark. Do not envy them. but we have plenty of noise here in Queens as well. Noise can affect residents in many more ways than just being a nuisance and interrupting conversations. It can also increase stress, cause a lack of concentration, and even is associated with cardiovascular disease. And people have been complaining about the noise impacts of jet airplanes since the 1960s, and it continues to be an issue and gets brought up even today. We all got a slight break from the noise at the start of the pandemic in March, but things are starting to go back to normal. And so the impact of these noise in the communities of Corona, Flushing, are all still being felt today. Jamaica as well. But the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey does do impact surveys. They consider every aspect of changes that they're going to make before they make them. You can go onto their website and find all of those. And they found that almost all of their changes do not increase the amount of noise that is already present in Queens. But the technology associated with this kind of stuff does continue to improve. And so hopefully we'll be able to find more ways to mitigate the problem for everybody. So that brings me to a conclusion of what I have to say about airports in Queens. However, before I do want to go over the fact that airlines continue to be an interesting balance of public architecture and a focus on efficient design and simplicity. So keep an eye out for the next time that you're going through an airport. Like, how did we arrive at these designs? What makes this architecture unique? How do you feel about the airport around you? Because I know airports can be very stressful, and it can really affect the way that you see things around you. Because when you're feeling stressed, everything else feels like it's antagonizing you. But if you take the time to kind of just appreciate the airport around you, you might find that you enjoy it a lot more than you would have realized. I know when I went to TWA, just for the sake of going to the hotel and not trying to catch a flight, it was a completely different experience. It was very relaxing, had a good time. It was also enjoyable to interact with the history of that airport without that constant pressure of, oh, I have to catch a flight in an hour. But I also want to thank Paul Freeman and Marnix Groot. These two websites were absolutely essential to the creation of this this presentation. There are large communities dedicated to airlines, airplanes, and the history of these things. And they do a wonderful job of compiling all of this stuff. I would highly encourage that you go to these websites to check out even more information than what I had here today. So if anybody has any questions, I would love to answer them. And thank you, Laura. And yes, those X-ray machines are really weird. They've only gotten weirder over time. And I see that you had your parents took you to JFK just to watch the planes take off and land. That's very fun. I know that watching such large machines take off can be very awe-inspiring and can serve for inspiration into the future. I know a couple of people who were inspired to become engineers because of their experience watching airplanes. All right. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to today. Once again, so Queens Historical Society has more programs coming up. We have in early May 1st, we're going to have a In Your Neighborhood program on the Greek Orthodox Easter and the ceremony surrounding that. And we're going to be announcing some more programs coming up. We also have coming up in May our Step into Queens program. More information about that will be coming shortly, but that should be another large virtual tour that involves more than just the Kingsland Homestead and Queens Historical Society. We've partnered with 4 other organizations, so we're going to have a full tour across Queens. So it should be fun to see. If anybody would love to share more information about their experiences at these airports, I would love to hear it. Shoot me an email at Queens Historical Society.org. Shoot me an email also if you have any questions that I will do my best to answer. Thank you guys, and I'll see you at our next program. Have a good day, everybody.